Ladies and gentlemen, punks and non-punks alike, welcome. Episode 10 of the Human Energy Field. We're into double figures now. What do you think so far, Jamie? What do you think? We've got 10 episodes deep, with the Discord's up and running and kind of slowly picking up pace. We've got the Instagram. How have things been so far for you?
I think we've really come on, haven't we, a little bit, I think. And that's not to blow our own trumpets, because I'm not saying what we're doing is amazing, but what I'm saying is what we're doing is already better than what we started doing. So,
Yes.
You know, anyone who's been with us since the beginning and has listened to the first few episodes can see a difference when we kind of level up and, you know, get some new gear. And that was a bit, I think that was like episode 4, I think you could tell from the sound quality. Yeah, and there's obviously been another like episode thrown in there, so yeah, it's been fun. I can't believe we're already at double digits.
I know, it's crazy. And I've had some friends message me and say, you guys sound like a proper podcast now, which is nice, because I guess we didn't at first.
Yeah.
You know, we just kind of get off the ground.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. You know, we can, because even when we started the first one, we were not shy about saying we'd never done it before. We were literally just finding our feet as we did it. So obviously we listened to other people, friends and strangers who've done it as well. So obviously we're standing on the shoulder of giants, so to speak. But yeah, I think we're firmly in our groove now, is what I feel.
I like that. Absolutely standing on the shoulders of giants as well. We have to pay homage to the podcasts and the personalities that have come before us. Who, you never know, without them we might not be doing this. You can't tell, can you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. You know, I definitely wouldn't be as interested in doing a podcast if I hadn't been, you know, so inspired and entertained by a handful of podcasts that I do listen to, you know?
Yeah, true. And it's like with music, isn't it? You make what you want to hear yourself.
Yeah,
so
yeah, of course.
I'm really pleased with how things are going so far, especially the Discord. It's just such a great feeling logging into the Discord and seeing people talking about all the kinds of topics that we cover here on the show and more off the show. You know, we've got in-jokes forming organically, which is something I never thought I'd see. And, you know, every time I log in, there's something new happening. So it's a really great little space. And if you are listening to this and you're on the Discord, then just thank you very much for being a part of that little community there and your input. Whether you're just talking about death metal all day or if you're actually talking about RPGs as well. Just thanks, guys. If you're on the Discord, just thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I've been enjoying the Discord as well. And I'll be honest, sometimes when if you get up in the morning or you're on your break from work or whatever, and I go to check my phone, I quite often go to the Discord before I go to Instagram now. I just go straight to the Discord and see what's going on there, because that's the kind of conversations I want to be having and stuff. So I'm enjoying that, being able to just go straight there, and then because I don't do Facebook anyway, but I do Instagram, but there's not that level of chat, whereas the Discord is that really nice, isn't it? There's that extra level of interaction. So
yeah, absolutely, and we get ideas for more episodes on the Discord as well.
We do, yeah. So
you've been throwing around a few little zines and stuff in our Discord channel. So why don't you just kick us off with one of those? What's something you've been reading recently that you're dying to bring and talk about? Because I don't really know what you've got in front of you there.
Okay, so I guess the first thing that I want to get into is I received my second printing of the first issue of the Eye of Terror fanzine. I've posted about it on the pod's Instagram, and I've mentioned it in the Discord. Anyone who wants to have another look can go to Eye of Terror fanzine on Instagram. I'm not sure if they're on Facebook, but yeah, this is the first issue of a quite tidy little Warhammer-centric zine. There's a little bit of chat at the end where he says, this episode has kind of turned out very Warhammer heavy. And I was thinking, well, I should hope so. It's called Eye of Terror. So again, I don't know what he was expecting, but it certainly is Warhammer heavy. So to do a bit of groundwork on it, it's basically there are a series of articles, a little bit of art. There's an interview with the guys from the Great Rift, which is the chaps who talk about the Black Library novels. So that's quite an interesting little interview.
Cool.
I enjoyed that because I dip my toe into Black Library books. I am not a kind of fanatic of the GW written word. There's a lot to get into there, and So it was nice to kind of read that interview and it kind of did its job, because it made me want to go and check out the Great Rift podcast. So which I haven't done yet, but I think this article will drive me to do that. There's a lovely little article about the art of Ian Miller, written by Dungeon Punks and Trap Nerves Nathan Bean, which is, I mean, his writing style is amazing. It's like, it's really good, really entertaining.
I like the way Nate writes.
Yeah, he really very illustrative writing. Do you know what I mean? I really like conjures an image, which is exactly what Ian Miller does.
Very visceral.
Yeah. So there's also a little chat about more time, and there's a few pieces of fluff fiction. All in all, I think it was a really great little first issue. I enjoyed it. Normally, I kind of digest a fanzine in a couple of sittings, but I just sat down and got cover to cover. I give myself the time just to enjoy it all the way through. It's not all 10 out of 10, if I'm going to be absolutely honest. I'm not going to point out which piece of fluff there is, but there's 3. But one of them I think was really below par, and the others were okay. But all in all, I think for what it is and the price that it was, I think it's been put together really professionally, and I think it looks really good. There are some kind of photographs in it, in the More Time article, which are a bit hard to see because it's printed in black and white, which is understandable. But throughout the rest of the issue, the art is pretty crisp, pretty clear. So yeah, all in all, good marks for that issue. I really look forward to the second one. I know he's put out like a shout for people to put submissions in, so I can only hope that there will be tons of material for an issue 2 and an issue 3, etc., etc. And the profits go to a good cause. So there's the Trussell Trust, which is a UK-based charity, that supports the food banks, and the Temple of Boom in Leeds, which is a place dear to both of our hearts, who have really struggled, as many businesses have, through this entire debacle. And so all the proceeds from this have been going to those 2 very worthy causes. So I can give it no more praise than saying, if you're at all interested in Warhammer or the Temple of Boom, or just reading something cool, definitely see if you can pick up a copy of Eye of Terror. I'd like to hope they'll go for another print on issue 1, and if not, then keep your eye out for issue 2, because I really enjoyed it on the whole. I thought it was smashing.
Yeah, well, you sold it to me already, and that's even without the donations to food banks and music venues. I really like the inclusion of Warhammer fluff as well. I think fluff is or sort of fan fluff, I guess, if you like. It's a underrated part of the Warhammer hobby. I
think it's so hard to decide what fluff and how much fluff to put in a fanzine, though.
Mm-hmm. I mean, unless it's a fiction fanzine, but I know what you're saying. You want to have that balance between, are you just indulging someone's kind of writing for the sake of it, or is it actually going to fit in with the interviews and the artwork and the features that you've got in there as well?
I mean, I know I said I didn't enjoy one of the pieces, but I mean, that's not any particular slight on the person who wrote it. There are plenty of actually published Black Library novels I don't enjoy. So, a lot of that comes down to personal taste. But one of the pieces in there was really caught my attention, was really, really good. So yeah, it was interesting to see. I'm normally the kind of person who skips the fluff in a rule book. The kind of inevitable fluff at the start of an RPG book or something. I kind of skip past that, and I'll get back to it later if I feel I've got time. I just want to get into the meat and gravy of it. But I found this was it was a nice part of the overall tone of this fanzine. Those little fluff pieces. So yeah, I think they really worked on the whole.
Great. That's good to know. And obviously we'll be talking a bit about some more fluff Warhammer-related projects towards the end of the episode when we cover our usual Nothos segment, so stay tuned for that, guys. But that's really good to hear that it's a kind of... they've come out swinging in a way, haven't they? It's a really complete kind of product for issue 1.
I was a little bit slow on the uptake, so I only jumped on the bandwagon at this second pressing of the first issue. For somehow I snoozed on the first printing of it. So, but yeah, they really have come out strong with it. I will definitely be purchasing in issue 2. Hopefully, that will come out pretty soon.
Awesome. Okay. I mean, yeah, I missed this until after it sold out, but there's just so much being produced and there's so much content being made every day in all kinds of corners of the internet. I'm not bound to kind of... But that's one of the reasons why we make Human Energy Field, for our listeners to find out this stuff any other way, and hopefully learn some new books and zines that they may have otherwise not heard of. So in that respect, you've done your job very well.
Indeed.
Speaking of zines, you've got something else as well that I know. I want to hear you talk about this because I really like the cover artwork on it. You know what I'm going to say.
I do. I have with me right now. It's really well produced, actually, and it is a zine. But you know what? I think, with all due respect, I'm gonna give it its Sunday name. It's a magazine. Because I think it's too good and too well produced to really be called a zine, if I'm honest. And what I'm talking about is the new third issue of Bayat Al-Azif, which I've now caught up on. There's 3 issues so far. The number 3 is the most recent one. I've managed to kind of fill in my gaps in the collection, which was issue 2. And I've been enjoying issue 3. I had mentioned on the Discord that I thought this was essential reading for serious Call of Cthulhu fans. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I'm going to revise that statement because I think it's selling it short to say it's only for serious Call of Cthulhu fans. I think it's just as intriguing and important as an illuminating for casual Call of Cthulhu fans, even for Call of Cthulhu newbies, or Cthulhu newbies, as I've just come up with that word.
Cthulhu.
So yeah, even for Cthulhu newbies. It's, do you know why? Because they are doing a really, well, basically I'll describe the magazine. It's a well-produced A4 format. It's 120 pages. It's got scenarios, it's got reviews, a little bit of graphic art, interviews, stuff like that. But one of the really interesting articles is it goes through a retrospective of all of the Cthulhu role-playing books that were published in 2019, and some of the other issues that we do in different years. And I know 2019 isn't very long ago, but as you say, unless there's so much going on in the internet, and unless you're really got your finger on the otherworldly pulse of the Cthulhu gaming industry, you could have easily missed a lot of these things. And I really enjoyed looking through all the titles that were released only a year and a half, 2 years ago. And there's definitely some stuff I haven't seen here, some stuff I was aware of and some stuff I wasn't aware of. So I think that in itself is in the first 3 issues, there's a great recap of very modern Call of Cthulhu supplements that have been released over the kind of past 3 or 4 years, which I found really useful. And it's definitely nudged me to go, I might pick up the odd thing or two. To admit, I'm a big 5th edition Call of Cthulhu fan. That's when I got into the game. So I spent a lot of time and money filling my 5th edition collection. So I don't really have the need to pick up the new edition when it came out, the 7th edition. I'm not really into buying a lot of new supplements for Call of Cthulhu. I've kind of got a lot of stuff already. Mm-hmm. But this, I think, is just as useful for someone like me who is playing an old version of Call of Cthulhu as to somebody who's just getting into it, because there are 3 scenarios in this one. All of them are really well written, but there's a stellar scenario called Operation Ice Dragon, which is set in the 1960s, set in the kind of Cold War Cthulhu kind of time bracket. And it's an excellent scenario. If I don't run it as a Cthulhu scenario, I'm going to adapt it to either a World of Darkness scenario or just a generic kind of horror scenario, because it's just really good, and it's written by, I want to give credit where credit's due, Rich McKee. So I would definitely be keeping an eye out for any other little scenarios that he writes, because it was really excellent. So I would say that it was worth the price of admission in itself just to get this Operation Ice Dragon scenario. And the rest of the magazine is it's really good. Yeah, there's a little graphic novel in it. That's a graphic novel, like a 6-page graphic story. I could have take or leave that, if I'm honest. But that's just me. If I want to read a Call of Cthulhu comic, I'll go and buy one. I don't think, as good as this might be, I think it's just a bit of a waste of page count, if I'm honest. But with so many pages, this is a minor gripe. To kind of give up a few pages to this kind of graphic novel. There's actually a few articles which are quite short, and I think could have well deserved more page count as well. So there's there's a mythos in the technology article, which is really intriguing to me, because dealing with modern equipment, especially in a Cthulhu Now campaign, anything, internet and mobile phones, is a really interesting approach for GMs to try and handle that. And even though I was entertained by the page that I read, I just thought, I could have read a long article about that. So I would have loved to have heard the thoughts a little longer. So yeah, I with each copy of Buy It As If I get, I become more impressed with it. I was kind of so on the first issue, even though it was a high production quality. But having really enjoyed, issue 3 and issue 2, I just think anyone who is interested at all with Call of Cthulhu, whether you're just getting into it, whether you bought a 7th edition starter box, or whether you just like Lovecraft fiction and you actually haven't bought any Call of Cthulhu role-playing yet, I think picking up a copy of Buy It As If is going to be a wonderful way to open the door into that role-playing world of the mythos, and obviously it's primarily geared towards modern Call of Cthulhu in the GUMSHOE system, but the way that Call of Cthulhu is with the game, all of this is really usable by anybody using any sort of system, if I'm honest. So yeah, real thumbs up, and it gets the hef bang for your buck approval.
Love it.
Because it's not, don't get me wrong, it isn't cheap, and that's why I hesitate to call it a zine. I think I can't remember, I paid 15 quid or whatever it was for this one.
Oof.
Yeah, but
that's magazine price, isn't it? That
it is. But as I've just said, it also feels like a gaming supplement, because it's got 3 really good scenarios in it, as well as some other stuff. So, and you see where the money's gone in the production quality, because it's well bound. It's it's well produced. The cover is a kind of heavy cardstock with a. I don't know enough about printing to know what it is, but when it feels nice to touch. Oh, you know, kind of like a smooth, like a velvety feel on the cover. So yeah, I did not feel robbed about the money that I'd spent on Buy It As If. I thought it was really good. That's my hot pick, I think, for now.
Amazing. Okay, yeah, it looks really pretty from what I've seen. The cover looks really nice, and I'm actually surprised to hear, first of all, that it's A4. But also that it cost you £15. I mean, I wouldn't release a product and call it a zine if I was charging £15 for it. It would be something different. It would just be a book or a magazine or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's called a magazine, but you get these booker zines, don't you? That can be expensive. So yeah, like, I guess it is what it is. So it isn't cheap, but yeah, I paid £13.50 for it.
Right.
So. I mean, that's cheap for a role-playing supplement, in my opinion. And I think this qualifies as both magazine and role-playing supplement. So, if you think about it, it's 3 or 4 quid for each scenario and then some extras.
Yeah, okay. So to bring it into the RPG itself for a bit, I definitely fit into that latter category of people that you mentioned earlier who have not played much, if any, Call of Cthulhu. I don't own any Call of Cthulhu books on my shelf. I've got a big Necronomicon Lovecraft completed works down here. The big black leather-bound one.
Yes,
I got that.
I love that one.
But in terms of the RPG side of the Lovecraft mythos, it's not something that I've really explored too much. I'm aware that there's Call of Cthulhu. I'm also aware that there's another game called Trail of Cthulhu. Now, when you were talking about 7th edition, is that what you meant, or is these 2 completely different product lines?
No, so Call of Cthulhu 7th edition is just the most recent incarnation of a game that began all the way back in the very early 80s. And it was originally published under license with Games Workshop and then Chaosium. So it's just in its 7th incarnation. And the rules haven't really changed much over the editions. They're still pretty much backwards compatible. I think the new 7th edition... it is the one that has developed the mechanics the furthest, so it really feels like a brand new edition. I don't have massive experience with it because, as I said before, I'm really rooted in 5th edition, so I had no need to buy the new one. But it looks pretty. It's a hardback. It's quite expensive, but I mean, RPG core books can be now. So, but Trail of Cthulhu is a different game, which is also inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, but uses Robin D. Law's GUMSHOE system, which was kind of developed through some of the other products like Esoterrorists and Fear itself, and kind of developed through those small, they're not quite indie games, but those kind of small games that were coming out by Robin D. Laws, kind of 15 years ago, and it's developed into a full investigative system that is really well designed for supporting the kind of game that Call of Cthulhu is intended to be, where you are investigators. You go around, you look for clues, the clue will lead you to another location where you will pick up clues and solve the mystery. And part of the problem that was leveled at the original Call of Cthulhu was that if the player characters missed a clue or failed to succeed their library roll or whatever it happened to be, then the game was a little bit stuck, because the GM would have to be, come up with something clever as to why the PCs can then continue to succeed. Robin D. Laws looked at this and decided to build the entire mechanics around allowing the investigators to succeed at getting these clues in an interesting way and moving the game forward. So it's a totally different gaming system. It's two different ways to play Call of Cthulhu. I would say the original Call of Cthulhu is what I'd call the trad version, and this kind of GUMSHOE is maybe the kind of new, more narrative version, if you really had to pigeonhole them. But they're providing the same kind of feel, the same kind of game, but with a different mechanical approach.
Right. Do you have a preference? What do you think of Trail and the GUMSHOE system in itself? Because I've seen this come up. I've got Esoterrorists. I also have Night's Black Agents, which discusses GUMSHOE system to a certain extent.
It is, yeah.
And those two books in themselves made me think, what's this GUMSHOE system? If these books were about things that I'm interested in and talking about this game engine, then it's something that I want to look into a little bit more. What do you think about GUMSHOE?
Okay, so this is going to sound like a two-part answer, because I think it's really valuable for what it does, but it's basically a cheat sheet for Call of Cthulhu. It allows game masters to overcome a problem which is understandably there in Call of Cthulhu, but a good GM and a good group would have been able to work around that anyway. I've been playing Call of Cthulhu for 30 years, and you learn to live with it. You learn to kind of learn how to handle the system. I think the Call of Cthulhu system lasted the way it was for so long because it did work. I think having a fresh approach to make the game easier to run isn't a bad thing for new players. So I can totally see the appeal of Trail of Cthulhu for a group who didn't start many years ago with Call of Cthulhu. So I think for new players, Trail is much more forgiving. And I think the new version of Call of Cthulhu, 7th edition, borrows a lot of ideas in terms of its flavour and tone from Trail of Cthulhu, if I'm honest. But I think it's a shortcut, basically, is what it is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to struggle when we're running or playing our games. So if you're just getting into it and you want to be supported by the mechanics in the system rather than kind of struggle, then Trail of Cthulhu is going to be friendly to you. But I've never felt the need to use it rather than just stick to Call of Cthulhu. But then again, the voice of experience, I can deal with PCs who have missed a clue. I can, hide that clue somewhere else and make it look like it was always somewhere else. I'm kind of used to that, and that's okay. But not a lot of new GMs can do that on the fly. So I can totally understand why they would find Trail of Cthulhu more fun, if I can put it like that in brackets. Yeah. I mean, it's almost a question of technique, isn't it? I suppose from the element from the side of the GM, from what you're saying. But I understand the need for systems that are forgiving when it comes to character failure. There's the classic situation of if you can't get through the door, the whole adventure comes to a grinding halt because one dice roll was missed and that kind of thing. I know we're kind of moving past that mindset now, and that even game engines are having baked in rules such as this GUMSHOE thing that mean that doesn't happen anymore. And that's definitely one way to solve the situation and to make sure that your games don't come to a stop because one player rolled a 1 on one roll. But at the same time, like you're saying, if your technique is correct or you have a versatile toolkit as a GM, you are able to overcome those boundaries
at the table instead of in the rulebook. And I think it's probably two different approaches to the same problem, really, isn't it? So one's not inherently better than the other, but certainly one requires the experience and the foresight and having made those mistakes in the past to overcome, whereas the other one just says, oh, don't worry about it, same thing as failing forward, just make sure that you're always doing X and Y and you can't go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, absolutely. I think what it does make me wonder about when you were saying that, though, was I do worry about the ever-increasing trend of avoiding failure in RPGs. It's almost like we're getting into a situation where players feel they need to succeed and they need to move forward and they don't want to struggle. And I think that to me is personally is a bad trend to get into. You know, my PC will never fail. My PC should always succeed, and I should always win, and I don't want my character to die. It is the attitude of a lot of gamers that I listen to now, and I'm just thinking, what? Like, what's the point in rolling a dice if you only ever want to succeed? And being upset that you didn't, and then blaming the GM because you're not having fun because you haven't succeeded with something, or your character's dead, or whatever that happens, whatever the failure is. And yeah, I just think this failing forward idea it's fine, but there's a danger of taking it too far.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, you know, no one wants their player character to be a doofus and miss every attack and get wounded all the time. You know, you want your... Well, it depends what kind of game you're running, I suppose, but as a whole, talking in general terms, you want your player character to be capable, probably in ways that you are not, which is, I imagine, is why you're role-playing in the first place. And you want them to have abilities and skills to pull off certain things. And if they walk into a room and they don't see a locked cabinet or whatever, then it makes the character feel kind of incompetent, which by extension makes you feel like a bad role player to a certain extent. I mean, I know I've had that situation in the past, and you just think, oh, fuck me, like if my stats were better, I wouldn't be feeling so personally bad right now about the fact that I can't progress this story forward. So there is a kind of extension of that. You know, I think people's own opinions come to the table more than I think we would like a lot of the time, and people take things personally. You know, I know because I felt that same thing. So maybe it's an extension of that, perhaps. Maybe it's a fail-safe for players who are taking their characters' failures personally.
Yeah, I worry that we're moving into a situation where the done thing to do at the table as a GM is to kind of baby your players.
Yeah.
To kind of always let them win.
Yeah.
Never kill them. I read an article. I don't know where it was. I'll find the link and I'll put it in the Discord. But I read an article about RPGs that don't have combat in because people are having issues with combat. So yeah, and I just thought, that's okay. Not every session I run. I've run many sessions of lots of games that haven't had a combat scene in them. So I'm not against that, but actively setting up the game so that you don't have combat in it, I think is another step in this bizarre for me direction of I don't want confrontation in my game. I'm not comfortable with confrontation, so you as the GM have to make sure that I don't have to be hit by anybody or hit anyone else with a weapon. I don't want that to happen, and I don't want it to happen to any of my group either. So it's not just saying that I'm going to be the wizard who stands at the back in combat and doesn't fight and just does my spells. It's I don't want this game to feature combat. So when a combat scenario comes up, you know, we start getting into X card material or, you know, lines and veils of like, yeah. Well, I don't want to see combat. And that to me is odd. I find that unusual.
I mean, it's certainly in the minority. I would direct that person towards a book called Story by Robert McKee, which I'm sure you've read, which basically, as we all know as storytellers, teaches us that conflict is the essence of drama, and it doesn't have to be combative or violent, but in a lot of RPGs that's often the case. We exacerbate situations and we romanticize things and we blow them up at the gaming table and we make them larger than life, and I think that's part of the fun. As much as I would love to run an understated game where it's entirely as realistic as possible and people are just talking and there's no action going on, I think there's scope for that to be interesting too. But as a general rule, I think if you're taking combat out of your RPGs, I think you're missing the trick, because some of the best moments I've had at the gaming table, both running and playing games, have been combat related, and some really unforgettable moments that I won't bore everyone with at the moment. But I think combat's a really big, inherently big part of a lot of RPGs.
Let me paint you a picture. So the world is returning to normal, and you are GMing at some form of tournament or con, right?
Okay.
And you're GMing Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition. And there's an X card on the table, because that's the done thing at tournaments or cons or whatever.
Yep,
so let's just assume there's one there. Yeah.
People waiting for an X card debate won't get it this episode. We're going to gloss over that. Yeah.
Yeah. See previous episode about that.
Yeah.
But it's there. So, and you are building up there. They start in the village. They move out into the road, out into the wilderness, and you've set up an ambush. And some bandits leap out in front of your PCs. One of them draws a knife, and one of your players leans forward and lightly touches the X card. What do you do?
I'd be shocked at that point, I think.
But you also have to, and I'm putting half in capitals, you have to move. You have to just stop that moment and move on, right?
You do. This is a really good question, because you want to see how it plays out, don't you?
Yeah, but then, so you stop it. Maybe, there's a knife trigger. That's okay. Everybody's different. You just you abide by the rules of the X card. There's no discussion. You just you describe what happens and you move on. You are the next bit. You get to a haunted house or whatever. The twisted old man who lives in the attic runs down the stairs at the player characters with an axe in his hand. One of the players, maybe the same player, maybe a different one, lightly touches the X card. What do you do?
I abide by the rules of the X card, describe the scene, and move on.
Yeah. So this is the situation we're moving into, I think, is what I'm seeing.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect, but this is not out of the realms of happening, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I definitely, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, in the case of the bandit ambush, you don't know what's going to happen until the combat's resolved. Did the players make the roll to vanquish the opponents, or would they overcome? So having to skip all of those kind of decisions, if you like, it begins to have a negative effect on the story. That's where my mind's going, is I've got my GM's hat on. That's now having an adverse effect on the story I'm trying to tell. The fact that you're taking these scenes out, players are losing the ability to make decisions. We're losing dice rolls from the table. I'm probably now at this point worried for the sake of the game.
Yeah, because as you're quite right, you don't know how that ambush is going to turn out. The players could, with some quick charisma rolls or some intimidation or a bluff, manage to talk their way out of it, buy their way out of it, do whatever. But somebody touching the X card, unfortunately, due to the system that we've all agreed upon is the best way to do things, somebody has decided to use that option, which has been presented to them. You as a GM are under all obligation to then just tie up that scene and move forward. And you're absolutely right. I mean, how many times does that have to happen before you go, I'm not sure if I can run the adventure I'm meant to be running if every time somebody pulls a weapon on the characters that there is an X card touched. At what point does that become the player's problem and not the GM's? Or does it never?
I mean, and you might have a player sitting next to them who's looking at their level 2 spells going, I can't wait to cast Chromatic Orb or whatever. He wants to get into it, and he's prevented from, or she's prevented from having the game that they want to play because of, there's all kinds of ways that it could go down. But I think skipping over scenes, it's not about the violence and the combat. It's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about scenes where the outcome is undetermined until you play it through. And that is true of most combat, but also of other things. But the fact that would be glossed over because of the combat within that scene means that as a crux, as a bottleneck of the story, you're kind of losing progress. You're losing track of where it could go next. There are no dice being cast. There's no wounds. They probably got robbed. Who knows what happened? You have to just make it up and move on, wouldn't you? Well, the bandits come and you got robbed and they took your coins and they left, and now we're on the next scene.
Yeah, and I just think it's all well and good to kind of prep players coming up to a table about whether a game might have adult themes or be a bit dark or do whatever, but I don't think it's necessary for a GM to warn D&D players that there might be some combat. I would feel a bit like, well, kind of obviously.
Yeah, I hope so.
But then is that my fault now for assuming that there should be violent conflict in this game when I don't know if my players are comfortable with violent conflict?
Another good point. Maybe you should just be safe and announce it.
But then we get into, at every con, do we eventually just have to run games that can have confrontation, but in terms of unknown results used through the dice rolls and the mechanics, but there can't be any what I would call violent combat or confrontation in that physical sense. So you just have to, you could do traps and other stuff, but you just can't put combat in your games anymore.
Wow. Part of my brain's saying that would be a really fun DM challenge to try and achieve that, but for the sake of the conversation, in a general sense, that is probably not the way I would like things to go down. That's worrying to me. It's not something that I'd like to do. But as a one-off, wouldn't it be interesting to try and do a whole specifically D&D game without combat and see how it goes? Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. You can go back decades where people will discuss these kind of games. So I remember the old character class handbooks for AD&D, for instance, for 2nd edition. There was like a fighter's handbook, the wizard's handbook or whatever. And there was always a really interesting piece in every book saying, what about an all-wizard campaign? Yeah. And that would have loads of cool suggestions about, because you can't put 4 level 1 wizards into a fight. They'll die. They can't fight goblins. They've all got no armor and 1d4 hit points. And so there's always been ways of kind of playing those kind of games. But on the whole, I'm worrying that I read this in a published article online. So this is not me worrying about a worst case scenario. This is me kind of reading the writing on the wall and going, is this the direction we're headed in?
Yeah.
And I do worry about that because it would certainly make me think twice about running it as a GM in a big tournament or a convention or whatever, because you have to just be as safe as you can be right now, because we've all read stories about how this can go really wrong. Yeah,
and there's a point when safety overrides fun, isn't it? There is that point when it gets to a stage where you can have both, but being too safe stops things from. I mean, ultimately, it's a game. We're just playing games. It's not world ending.
But then whatever you mention in a game, it's just a game to you. But to somebody else, it's more important, and that's why the X card exists.
Also true.
So even though a little bit of combat with some goblins or some dwarves or whatever might not mean anything to you, the person might have a fear of goblins in real life, and we can laugh at that. But then, would I then be demonized for laughing at some poor player who touched the X card at goblins every time I put goblins in the scenario? It's not for me to laugh at him for being afraid of goblins, right? That's his right. That's his. I have to protect him as a player and a person for his decision to be uncomfortable with whatever he wants to be uncomfortable with, right?
I agree with that. It's very noble, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of default setting, isn't it? I can't, if I decide I'm going to make some horrible comment about this player touching the X card every time I put goblins in, then that I'm gonna get some flack for that,
Yeah, why have you put the X card down if you're gonna give the player flack for using it? You put it there so that it can be used without your input. It's there for the players to use as they see fit. Yeah.
Exactly. So my whole point is to get to the end of this thought experiment is if the minute you put the X card down, the players are then free to touch it for anything, even the things you might not think they're going to touch it for.
Yes. Yeah, so I suppose the lines and veils beforehand would be a more efficient way of agreeing on that, perhaps. Now we're getting into it now, aren't we?
Yeah, because, I mean, if you sit down and my players say to me, we're having a session 0 and we're talking about things, which I think, by the way, is really valuable. I think it's... I've been talking about doing, and I'm sure a lot of older gamers have been talking about doing session 0s for years and years and years and years. But now it's become like a real thing. It's become a thing that mainstream games talk about doing. And I think anyone who isn't doing session 0s should really do them. It's really valuable. Everyone will know, but basically it's the first session where you get together with your players to spend that entire session talking about the kind of game you want to do, building your characters together, all of that kind of stuff. so that everybody is on the same page when you start your session 1. And I think if I'd sat down and some players were like, I'm really uncomfortable with combat, I'd be like, okay, right, that's cool, but what do you mean by combat? And if they were like, well, any kind of combat, I'd be like, oh, okay, the game that I have in mind will potentially have some combat in, so I don't want to exclude you from this game, but maybe you should join another game I'm running, or something else, or, you know, I can help you find a game that doesn't have any combat in, because I don't really want to take combat out of my game.
Mm-hmm.
But then am I wrong for doing that? Am I then excluding that player?
This is a very complicated question. I think as a GM, you have a certain amount of right and license to the story that you're telling, specifically if it's your baby. If you've got something that you really want to do, and let's say it features combat, I think you have a right to the game, especially if it hasn't started yet. You know, I think the dynamic is a little bit different if the players have not yet made characters. But on the whole, I think the GM has a certain kind of, you know, the GM's there to have fun too. But as the storyteller, you have a vision. You're in a way, you're the director of the movie, aren't you? And, you know, and to a certain extent, it's your vision that is being played out. You've got a way you want to take it. You've got things you want to include, etc. So
where do you draw the line with that? Because your vision for this game or session might be a pregnant nun as the bad guy, and if somebody has an issue with that, I mean, that might not be discussed at the beginning, but it's well within somebody's rights to be upset about that, and that they're taking your vision away. At what point can your vision be compromised, or should it be compromised? At what point does your vision remain kind of sacrosanct to the player's wishes?
Well, first of all, if you ever run a game including a pregnant nun, please keep me in mind. I'd like to play in that.
Again, you mean again?
yeah. If you ever run another game, yeah. I mean, it depends on the game and the group. So I think that gets into semantics at that point. I think there's no one line that you could make a rule of for every game, because it does depend on the player group and the GM specifically. So that would be a case by case basis for me.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're obviously getting to the kind of end of this, but you're right, it's so tough to find an answer to that, because it would make me really disappointed if I went to a tournament to run D&D and every combat that I put in was stopped by the X card. And I don't know if I should be feeling disappointed, but I think if I'm honest, that would disappoint me.
Yeah, no, that would suck, man. I'll say it straight.
Yeah.
That'd be awful. I'd hate that. You know, you're just looking forward to getting to a scene to play out, to have some action going.
Yeah.
Everyone likes a bit of action.
But then does that make us arseholes?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean,
I get it.
It depends who you ask, doesn't it? Because if some people might say that merely the fact that we say a bad word about the X card at all would make us arseholes, whereas some people would agree with the points that we're making. So again, case by case basis, isn't it? There's so many different niches and communities out there now, and they've all got their own ways of doing things. And I've got no problem with any of them, but this is us and this is ours, I suppose, right? I mean,
yeah, 100%, and I totally support and agree with that. But, you know, I learned a long time, and I had to learn this, that whatever a group is doing around the table, if as long as they're having fun, they're doing it right.
That's it, exactly.
And I've been guilty in the past of going, you're not playing it properly, you know, like, stop getting Bond wrong, like, you know, that kind of thing. But as long as they're having fun, let them crack on. And I realised that, you know, a long time ago, thankfully, but I had to come to that realisation. So I'm well, you know, respecting other people's way to play a certain game any way they want. But as the world reopens, we will get back into cons, we will get back into tournaments, we will get back into gaming groups, you know, gaming stores that have gaming space where you will meet new players. These are all of the hurdles and pitfalls that GMs will now have to learn to maneuver in what I will call the new environment of tabletop gaming, which is very different to your daddy's environment of tabletop gaming.
It's true. It's a new world. It's a modern world. It's a modern society.
It is. And you know, I'm not entirely certain it's for me. I'm not sure how comfortable I would be sitting down at a local gaming store and running an RPG session for people I don't know anymore. And if I did, I would have to make sure that was the softest, most inoffensive, happy-go-lucky Saturday morning cartoon feel game ever. So, and I can do that, that's fine, but that would be the only way I could do that.
Yeah, just playing it safe for safety's sake.
Super safe.
Yeah, you're right, man. That's really hit me deep in the heart. That has that you wouldn't feel as comfortable playing for strangers as you would have done a few decades ago. That's pretty deep.
If you have thoughts on this, please come and join us in the Discord and tell us why we're right or how we're wrong, and what are your personal experiences. Maybe, you know, have you been at a table where these things have happened? Have you been that person on the other side? I think, you know, if you've listened this far, we're not necessarily saying what's right or wrong. We're just kind of throwing the question up there. You know, there's a lot of different opinions, so if I really want to hear other people's opinions. And I believe you can email us as well if you want to have any long email comments at humanenergyfieldpodcast
at gmail.com. That's correct.
Yeah. So, you know, if you want to get in touch with the show that way, then, you know, please do email us. You know, if you want to write a strongly worded letter about my ill-considered thoughts on the X card, then please do so. I won't read it, but no, I will. Yeah, of course I would. Yeah, our inbox isn't full enough for me to ignore it, so I would definitely read it. No, I would, of course, jokes aside, read it and consider it, because I do want to know other people's opinions, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, in a way, the Discord is like the extras for the podcast, and we have conversations there that we don't have when we're on air, so... I mean, the real uncut version is come and sit in the pub with us, and then we'll have a proper chat, and you know, when there's no microphones around. But the Discord has its own kind of style, and both me and you like to have input on there, which is probably a bit more in depth than where we dare to go on a regular episode of Human Energy Field, the podcast. So if you're into this kind of conversation and you want to get stuck into these kind of abstract concepts of safety and combatless gaming and that kind of thing, then do join the Discord. I'll put the link in whatever show notes, so wherever you're listening to this, you should be able to find the Discord, or send us an email and I'll send you a link right back, humanenergyfieldpodcast@gmail.com. I can't believe the time. I'm looking at how long this episode's been going already, and I'm in a rush to hear about the next book that you've got on the agenda. This is really what I want to, this is what I've been waiting for.
I've been really excited to talk about this book. Anyone who's listened to these episodes will have picked up that I've been enjoying the Osprey games, role-playing games that have been coming out. I believe at the time of recording this, we're up to about 5 different games that they have in their selection. And this episode, I really want to talk about Righteous Blood and Ruthless Blades by Brendan Davis and Jeremy Bai. I apologise if I pronounced that name wrong, but I don't know. It's a similar format to a lot of the other Osprey RPGs that have come out. So you're looking at a kind of 270-page A5 hardback glossy pages, beautiful production quality, full colour pages, and this one is basically all about, now you have to teach me how to pronounce this. Is it Wuxia? Wuxia role playing. It's one of those words that I've read a lot and never said out loud, which is a lot of words. So yeah, Wuxia role playing. It's inspired by mostly the cinema. When you read through, you can get the writers have been inspired by classic cinema from the 60s, 70s, and onwards, but also by Wuxia literature. This book, I thought Jackals was the best one. This has surpassed it has. Now, that is not to knock Jackals, because I love Jackals. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, that's the Bronze Age kind of fantasy role-playing game that Osprey released that I talked about, I think, last episode or the episode before. But this, it tops it in terms of writing style, gaming mechanics, resources. Everything in here is almost entirely flawless. And I don't say that about a game very often.
I've never heard you use that word.
Well, there you go. I'm a newcomer to the genre, as you may have guessed there. I can't even pronounce it. So I'm not immersed in that Wuxia background. You know, I don't know all the different movies and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I've watched some, you know, kung fu movies, and I've read some martial arts stuff, and, you know, like a lot of people have. But this presents a very it's almost like an Old West style is the best way I can put it, with like lone swordsmen and kind of crime bosses, and it's basically set in a kind of medieval China underworld. So imagine, gangsters and thieves and princesses and renegade swordsmen and all that kind of stuff. And it's really, really heavy on style. As I've said, you can really get the love of the genre that the writers have, and they've managed to perfectly place that genre into a system and a world for you to represent in your tabletop session. Everything from the beginning of how you build your characters is built around it feeling and looking good. Your characters are all about their signature moves and their weapons that they use. About their martial arts style. For instance, everyone has like a killing aura, which is one of the things I love about it. And you can kind of sense other people's levels and killing auras when you kind of, that moment when two swordsmen are standing in the street and kind of eyeing each other out, and hands begin to edge towards the hilt of their swords, and the battle might already be won or lost before anyone's even drawn a sword, because someone's kind of out thought somebody. Just all of that amazing stuff. This killing aura is like what level you are, but also how many people like you've murdered and or killed, and not necessarily murdered, but killed with your weapons or your swords or your martial arts techniques, so that you can get these bad guys who have killing auras of dozens or whatever, and the GM can actually give the player a rough idea of what aura these NPCs have got, so you can get an idea of how badass they are. And they're not afraid to throw up these massive big crime bosses up against your players, and they should know fine well that this guy's got an aura of death around him, which is like hundreds of people,
That's
fields
cool.
of dead people around him. Yeah, it's very cool. But you can also progress through that as with your character. And there's rules for drinking and how you can get worse by drinking, but also get better sometimes by having too much rice wine. So there's some really cool stuff in there. There's some great I'm going to call them magic items, because that's what they are in a traditional RPG sense, but they feel more like AD&D artifacts. So each one has like a name and a background, and there's a handful of them in the book, which you can definitely use as inspiration. There's a handful of NPCs, quite a lot for you to litter your campaigns with. A whole host of fighting styles and weapons. You cannot fail to be inspired by the writing and the character options in this book when you read through it.
Amazing. I'm so excited to get myself a copy of this now, because I'm really into all this stuff. The killing aura idea sounds really good. It kind of takes that narrative idea of people facing off against each other on a wind-swept street, and it makes it mechanical, which I really like. With one number you can kind of sum up that whole pre-fight fight. So that's really great.
Yeah, it's great. It's all that kind of. It's basically the analysis phase of combat, where you kind of almost it can be finished before that. Before that, you even get into drawing swords when you know who's going to win or who's not. But the core mechanics in themselves are really easy. So it's a bunch of D10 against a target number, and you kind of pick the highest. So obviously, if you've got more D10, the chance of hitting that target number, but you only have to hit it with one dice. It is really good. And then obviously difficult, you can reduce the number of dice or roll multiple dice and pick the lowest. It's a very clever, very simple D10 system. The mechanics can be learned and taught in about 2 minutes. It's all of the ways that the weapons and the styles alter those basic mechanics, which make the game really interesting. It allows you to scale the heroicness of it to your taste. So you can play it very deadly, where once you hit with a sword, once you kind of out, or you could play it with a very kind of a much more heroic style, where you can get hit quite a few times before you're out, which makes for a bit more of a kind of exciting, kind of heroic way of doing it. But the game allows you and encourages you to do whatever suits your group. But I think as the default, it's quite deadly. So once combat breaks out, I'm going to paraphrase you. Combat can often be very violent and very short, and it's over very quickly. And that is really what this book kind of gets across.
Oh, I love it. That's how I like my combat every time. I don't like long, drawn out kind of waffling. I like combat to be fast and unfair and dangerous and bloody. and dare I say, righteous.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of that in this, and I think it really captures the feel of this this kind of underworld which you are playing in, which you are kind of manoeuvring in. I think it just captures it amazingly well. It's not a genre of role playing that I've done a huge amount of. I'm familiar with some old games, Weapons of the Gods, which is a Hong Kong comic book inspired role playing game by EOS Press, which is quite old. And some maybe Exalted, I think, falls under this banner, kind of. It's the kind of White Wolf Wuxia hybrid.
Cool.
I think. People might disagree with that, but I think Exalted, which obviously was around for a long time, has got that kind of Wuxia feel with all its signature styles and stuff like that. But I mean, this drags it back to it's what I would call real world. But I only use that because there's no like Oni in here or like Kappas or dragons or things like that. It's kind of humanocentric. It's all about, it's meant to be played kind of mythological, maybe is a better word than historical, because you can still do these amazing things that you see in some of these old kung fu movies, like leaping over buildings and freezing people's swords with manipulating your chi and all that kind of stuff.
That's really cool. I want to manipulate someone's chi with my fingertips and either heal or damage them by like doing some 5-finger technique on their ribcage.
Yeah, well, Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades allows you to do that. And encourages you to do that, actually.
Amazing. I am a big fan of Wuxia. I've got a quite a pressing question about this book, right? The vibe that I'm getting already is that it does a pretty good job of bringing to life the formula of Wuxia, the kind of genre staples. You got honor, warriors, kind of lonesome roads, maybe an element of magic or mythical gods or beasts, powerful legendary swords, that kind of thing. In a lot of ways, it has parallels with Western fantasy. This is probably China's own development of a kind of fantastical fiction, fantastical genre. Wuxia has a lot of romance in it and a lot of love. Does the book mention romance very often? Because without a love story, it's not Wuxia, if you ask me.
I think it really does a good job of introducing those concepts as maybe part of your character build or maybe part of your background, maybe your motivations. It doesn't really focus on that as in-play activities, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's got much more of a combat focus, but that doesn't mean that you can't take your game of Righteous Blood in that direction, because the mechanics, even though they're simple, they're robust enough to work for, kind of flirting and all that kind of stuff rather than just fighting. But I think it's unashamedly a game that the focus is on those amazing set-piece fight scenes in a cool environment with, talented opposition. Do you know what I mean? I think that's kind of what it's crying out for.
Right. You won't be running it at a con anytime soon, then?
No, I mean, unfortunately, I've got a list as long as my arm of games that I want to run. But I think if anything, this has made me want to go and learn a little bit more about the genre. There's a great kind of filmography in here and bibliography. Some great resources that the writers tell you can go and watch, and what you'll get out of them and where their influence has been. So if anything, I think what I'm probably going to do is quietly go away and watch not a lot, but definitely more Wuxia than I have previously. And I think that might inspire me to run a game based on whatever film I find really entertaining,
Yeah, absolutely. I recommend that. People stick around in a little bit because we're going to be reviewing a very famous Wuxia film shortly. The books and the novels that kind of brought Wuxia to life are very hard to get hold of a lot of the time, and it's hard. I've many times said to someone, "Can you recommend me some good Wuxia fiction to read?" And there's never the same answer from people. So it's almost like it's a very broad genre, and I've yet to hear about specific genre staples other than one I'm going to mention shortly. But in terms of the more kind of general fiction of Wuxia, it's very broad and it's very diverse. So I suppose we'll have to get reading and we'll have to find out exactly which books are good and which ones are worth our time, you know.
Well, I certainly got the feeling from reading this book that there's a lot more to be experienced on the screen than there is on the page. So that there was a lot more films listed than there were books. So maybe, I don't know if that's indicative of what's available in English or, you know, or translation. Maybe it's a translation thing, because it's a lot easier to watch a movie in another language than it is to read a book in another language. So maybe that's part of why there isn't a great amount of wuxia literature kind of floating about in English. There are mentions here of, you know, you can get translations online of certain books and everything, which I think is great for people who are really into it. I don't want to really read a book online, so, you know, if I can find a paperback or hardback kind of classic wuxia fiction, then definitely. But I think I'll definitely spare a few hours now and then to watch some of what the writers claim as being some of their major influences film-wise, because they've written a book that inspires me to want to play that game, so I can only assume that I would enjoy the films that have inspired them to make the game. Yeah,
definitely. Do they mention these films in the book, have they?
Do you know what? Yeah, well, there's a great section about the influences that have been given.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, just read some of those out for us, just in case anyone listening wants to do a little delve, like me.
All right. Okay, so yes, in answer to your question, there's a great section on inspirational viewing and inspirational reading. So the first wuxia movies appeared in the 1920s. This book is more focused on works from the 60s onwards. So films like Temple of the Red Lotus trilogy, Come Drink With Me, Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades is particularly inspired by darker wuxia films. So things like, from the 60s, you've got things like the Twin Swords, the One-Armed Swordsman. Moving through the 70s, you got like Master of the Flying Guillotine, Death Duel, Broken Oath. Moving into the 80s, we've got things like What Price Honesty, Killer Constable, Jade Dagger Ninja. Moving into the 90s, we've got things like Deadful Melody, The Bride with White Hair, Kung Fu Master, New Dragon Gate Inn. And then moving into the 2000s, things like Legend of the Black Scorpion, the 4 trilogy, 2016 Swordmaster is the most recent movie.
Awesome.
I mean, I've read out a handful. There is probably about 40 films listed here, so that there's a whole chunk moving from all the way through the 60s to the 2000s.
Wow, that's great. That's really good. I love a book that includes its influences in the back. You've got to have that, haven't you?
It's slap bang in the middle, actually. It's really, it took me a little while to find it, because it's right at the beginning of the game mastering section, which is actually thematically where it should be, but it just means finding it wasn't particularly easy, because there isn't it's not really mentioned in the index, you know. But it's good. It's got a good filmography there.
Yeah, awesome. Really, really great. That's really exciting. Expect more wuxia talk at some point in the future episode, because I'm definitely going to go away and watch Master of the Flying Guillotine and then come back and maybe talk about that in another episode, you know. And as well, we have to play this, dude. We've got to give this game a go, haven't we?
I think once I've watched a couple of movies, this is going to be so easy to do a one shot, just where the characters can be created pretty quick. I'm just going to get 4 or 5 people around the table and just say, look, we'll play for 3 or 4 hours and we'll just do some mad wuxia stuff, you know, and just really go crazy with it. I think because it's so easy to pick up, the game system is so easy to teach and learn, that I can imagine, as long as everyone comes to the table with the right kind of thought and kind of attitude and atmosphere, I think you can just slide right into it.
It's the sort of thing where I imagine players would sit down already picturing in their heads what they're going to be playing, you know.
Yeah.
Just listen to some Wu-Tang Clan. You get the idea.
Yeah. 36 Chambers.
Yeah, just watch 36 Chambers of Shaolin. You can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Or Hidden Blade or something like that. I know for a fact my wuxia swordsman needs to be pledged to a princess, otherwise he's no swordsman at all. He's got to have some kind of romance storyline in there. He's got to have a lost lover, or a forbidden love, or there's got to be some element of romance in there for me to really buy into it. That, to me, that makes wuxia, and I'm unapologetically romantic when it comes to my Chinese fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely enough in that book to keep you happy, because there's tons of stuff about giving your characters the right backstory and motivations and everything. There's a whole ton of that, so it doesn't shy off on any of that, you know.
Amazing. All right, I'm sold. I'm in. I hope you're not sick of talking about Wuxia, because the film that I've brought to the episode is very much in the same wheelhouse.
And what film is that?
Ang Lee's 2000 masterpiece, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
A classic.
An absolute classic. And the highest grossing foreign language film in American film history.
Wow, that is an accolade I did not know it had achieved.
Yes, this is, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's up there. Really up there as one of the best films I've ever seen that has ever been made. I'm firm in this belief. You know, it's an absolute staple of cinema to me, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I think the timing was right. The production team was kind of hand-picked and crafted together. It's a real kind of convergence of cast and crew, music, aesthetics, style. It brings everything together. It's everything you want from Wuxia to me in this film.
I don't know if you know or if you think, was this a movie that was maybe designed from the ground up for a more Western audience, or do you think it was just a breakthrough? It was designed for an original audience, but it just managed to break through to a Western audience?
I think, well, when you say ground up, it was based off a novel.
Right.
So it's based off a series of Wuxia books, a pentalogy, which people can go and look up if they want. It was called the Crane Iron series, written by noted Wuxia novelist Wang Dulu, otherwise known as Wang Baojiang. He did a lot of work in the... I don't want to get this wrong. Let me just have a look here. He did a lot of work in the 30s and 40s, which is when this Crane Iron series was published, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is the 4th book out of the 5.
Right.
So it was based off his novel series. I imagine there's some artistic license going on as well. But to answer your question, I know that Ang Lee, who in the year 2000 was a pretty prolific and successful director, he had a vision to bring this style to a global audience, and to make sure that it was going to be one of the most kind of graceful, beautiful films that people had ever seen. So he really wanted to kind of go all out and pull out all the stops with it and make sure that it was one for the books, you know.
I remember seeing it when it was new, and I was really blown away by it, because I think to a young moviegoer I was at the time, who maybe hadn't watched a lot of foreign language films. You know, I'd watched a bit of Tartan Asia Extreme stuff. You know, obviously I was aware of kind of old Bruce Lee movies or whatever, but those things were just one or two. I hadn't really seen this kind of cinema before, so I think for a lot of people it was super fresh.
Yeah, it was like nothing people had ever seen before. We had the kind of 1-2 punch at the end of the century with The Matrix and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I remember distinctly both of those films really changing the landscape of popular culture pretty much forever. If anyone remembers Newgrounds and those websites, there was a lot of spoofs and satires and things going on as well. It kind of had a lot of ripple effects outside as well, so we started to see music and other films and TV shows coming out. Both The Matrix and this film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, share a choreographer. Wu Ping Yuan was the choreographer for both these films, so there's a bit of crossover there as well. I believe it was a Chinese-American production, so really kind of global scale. And yeah, I remember watching this film when it came out, and I remember a lot of my friends laughing at it because of the style and the martial arts. I think perhaps we were fresh out of The Matrix, which is very different, very, very different style completely. And then you watch this martial arts epic, and these people are flying around the tops of bamboo trees and skipping across lakes and things.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, people thought it was funny, or at least over here in the West, or at least here in the Black Country, people thought it was funny, and people didn't really get it. I think you've got a big Western mindset something like this comes along, and if you're not willing to kind of open up a little bit, it unintentionally, I remember people laughing at it specifically.
Yeah, I can totally kind of vaguely remember that response as well from a lot of people that I knew. I think maybe the reason it was different for me personally is because I kind of almost, in a way, I know they're not the same, but you'll be able to see the connection when I say it. I kind of cut my teeth on this old manga entertainment anime stuff, late night animated, Fist of the North Star and Demon City Shinjuku and all that kind of Ruthless. And so that kind of, there's an element of style there which kind of crosses over a little bit. It's not the same, but I was like, to see it almost like a live action version of an anime kind of thing is where my younger brain kind of saw it,
Right, okay. Yeah, I think China and Japan share a lot of stylistic similarities in terms of their output, their cultural output. And it's, well, I mean, at least to a Western mind, it's something that is foreign, isn't it? And that's really... So, yeah, I mean... It was fresh to me. It was fresh to a lot of my friends who weren't particularly into anime or manga, and still aren't, I guess. But nevertheless, on a rewatch with what I would consider a fairly seasoned cultural mind, I was blown away, absolutely captivated by the fight scenes, by the sequences. Even listening to people talk in Mandarin is great to my ear. I love hearing the Chinese language. You've got 4 different main actors in this film who all come from different areas and all had separate Chinese accents for the Mandarin. Michelle Yeoh is English Taiwanese, so she learned Mandarin phonetically. Meanwhile, you've got Chow Yun-fat, who is Cantonese. He's from Hong Kong, so he learned Mandarin for the film. So, you've got the 4 main characters are speaking this language each in their separate ways, and apparently I read that it was so grating on native ears that they did a full Mandarin dub with ADR, different voice actors who could all do the same Mandarin accent, so that Chinese audiences wouldn't be put off by the different accents. But obviously to our ears, it all sounds like Mandarin,
Yeah. Oh wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. This film, honestly, there's a lot of great backstory and trivia about this film. It's an interesting dive just as itself. If you have not seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I suppose now is a good time to sum up what the film is about. I guess that's something that we should get into first.
Yeah, do a very quick plot analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. It's based off a Wuxia novel, which in a way I guess is a kind of fantasy novel. The film follows the story of a Wudan master called Li Mubai, played brilliantly by Chow Yun-fat, and he's a master swordsman, and he's decided to give up his sword, the Green Destiny Blade. He entrusts this legendary sword into the care of Michelle Yeoh's character, whose name I forget in the film, but it's Michelle Yeoh. And then the sword is stolen by a masked thief, and the kind of the mysteries and the romances kind of unfold from that kind of inciting incident near the start of the film, where we find that each of these characters has their own motivations about acquiring or returning the sword, what their own motivations are outside of this kind of conflict that has occurred. It's also one of the greatest love stories that I've ever seen. It's a very, very heartfelt, powerful love story that runs through this film as well. And we kind of globetrot around a lot of the Chinese landscape while we follow these characters and their adventures. And there's a lot of showcasing of martial arts, which are almost like dances, very kind of graceful movements. I think in wuxia fiction there is the idea that a warrior can become so skilled that they become light as a feather, and it's almost like the stronger and more powerful you are, the less you weigh, and the sort of ultimate showcase of your strength and ability is your weightlessness, is when you're at the kind of top of your game. So to depict that in this film, we have some great sequences where the characters are There's a lot of wire work, and the wires have been CG'd out. We have some great sequences where these characters are floating over treetops, and there's a great bit where they're fighting on bending bamboo canes in a bamboo forest.
Yes, yes, I remember that iconic scene.
So good, so good, so good.
So do you think, has this movie inspired the way that you maybe run D&D or any other role-playing game? Do you think it's filtered through to your table, or do you think it was something you'd have to force onto your gaming table?
Interesting. It's got some good concepts in it, definitely. I think it's more the concepts that I would apply rather than the style. For example, a lot of Wuxia, particularly a lot of this film, is duels or one person fighting a group, and I just can't see an adventuring party kind of fitting into this film.
Right.
But there are some great ideas and concepts that are explored that I would try and fit in. I really like the Green Destiny sword. It's a kind of centerpiece of the whole film, if you like, and each of the characters has their own motivations around this legendary sword made during the Qin era, engraved with a technique lost during the Han Dynasty, comes alive through skillful manipulation, this kind of thing. It's like its own artifact, and to wield it is to you almost have to step up to meet the challenge of wielding this sword to make sure that you're worthy of it, So there's, as a magic item, for example, it would be a cool thing to include, or some kind of legendary artifact blade.
It makes me really disappointed that somebody as big as Wizards haven't done either a source book or a 5th edition Character or Oriental Adventures or whatever they want to call it, something either rehash of the old stuff or a brand new kind of Asian inspired setting, because you'd think that would be something that would be really popular, right?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, we've got Oriental Adventures in 3rd edition.
Yeah.
There's various things like that, but how much of the hobby of role-playing really reaches China and Japan? Is it particularly popular over there?
I guess my comments and questions are not really about how it's taken in other countries. I've read a lot about the way that the role-playing hobby is in Japan, for instance, and I think there's a whole episode to do there about total differences in the industry and what games have become popular over there and what games have developed independently there. But I think my comment was about the Western audience being provided with an Asian setting for their games, rather than not a translation issue or anything like that, because I'm sure D&D is translated into many, many languages now and it's probably available globally. But D&D in its 5th edition, they brought out a lot of books, but there is a long-standing tradition of that kind of Asian setting in D&D ever since D&D 1st edition brought out the first Oriental Adventures book, and Character was a great setting for the Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms is still very popular. It's the default D&D 5th edition setting. So why Adventures, etc., haven't been set over there, it kind of surprises me. Do you think there's a concern about cultural appropriation?
Yeah. We can't talk about this without bringing up those words, can we? I mean, it's one of those things where for an example, do you remember that film that came out about the Great Wall and it starred Matt Damon?
Yes, I do remember. It was awful.
Yeah, it wasn't great. That's true. Yeah. It wasn't great. But they announced that film coming out. Obviously, it was for Chinese audiences. Everyone in the West was in uproar about the fact that they're whitewashing a Chinese film. They're putting white actors in the leading roles. And you go over to China and ask what the Chinese think, and they're just happy to see Matt Damon in a film. They're a fan of Matt Damon, So they don't care. It's
I do like Matt Damon.
Yeah, hey mate, can't go wrong with a bit of Matt Damon. But how much of this stuff is a fabrication of our culture, not theirs, and how much of it is a genuine concern? It maybe is not a discussion for this episode.
No, and I agree. And almost the greater subject and discussion maybe isn't even for the podcast in general. But I think when you drill it down to what are RPG companies producing, I think that is a relevant question for the podcast.
Yes, good framing there.
So the fact to me that D&D aren't willing to do something that is inspired by that kind of setting makes me think, are they just so concerned about potential complaints that they're just not going to bother attempting to do it?
Very possibly.
Just like,
yeah.
why bother? Why we're going to upset somebody? So just let's continue with this clearly fake place, which is the Forgotten Realms, where we can't upset anybody. If you want to play a monk is a character class. Crack on, brilliant. But we're not going to provide an Asian-inspired setting because somebody is going to tell me we've got it wrong.
Damn. I mean, maybe. I'm sure it's a minefield, isn't it? I'm sure they just, for the best, just said, if they want to do it, they'll do it. We haven't got to publish it. I don't know. I mean, China is a beautiful country, and there is a lot of influences to be taken from that part of the world for whatever kind of RPG you're running. You could do a whole game, even if you've never heard of Wuxia before. You could spend hours and hours drawing other influences. It doesn't have to be martial combat. It could be anything.
I agree. And every GM and every player can take influences from any historical period and any geographical period around the world. But I'm dragging this back to the big companies. You're looking at, Wizards particularly, who are doing D&D, which is arguably the most iconic and the most well-known gateway tabletop RPG for a lot of people. And maybe it could be argued that they should be doing it because then they are providing that opportunity for gamers to broaden their cultural horizons on their tabletop. Whereas not doing it is almost like it's noticeable by its absence.
Right, so when is it appropriation and when is it representation? Yes,
absolutely. And I can understand, and I know that from the events of the last kind of, maybe not this year, but several two or 3 years, there's been a great concern about the way that cultures and individual people have been presented in the intellectual properties that Wizards owns, be it Magic or D&D particularly. So I think they're very concerned about that. So I can understand why they would think it is a kind of delicate situation for them, and maybe one that they'd just like to avoid.
I mean, I guess maybe that's the smart business move from their standpoint.
It's a shame though, isn't it? It's a shame that people are going to be so upset that now we just can't have an Asian setting because somebody's going to get upset about it.
I mean, yeah, maybe that's not the reason, but yeah, you're right. It is a bit of a shame. Are there any modern Wizards releases that we could argue this case for elsewhere in the world?
I mean, to defend Wizards, I will say that in their Magic the Gathering game, they are constantly taking real-world cultures and kind of adapting them to their various planes, etc. And they did, going back a while now, but any MTG players will remember Khans of Tarkir, which was a kind of wider Asian setting with kind of separate cultures inside of it. But so Wizards are not strangers to showing that kind of style in their games, but I think Magic the Gathering is very different. But D&D obviously requires the writing of a source book and the development of NPCs and all that kind of stuff, and it is something that D&D have done throughout the years, first, second, third edition. So it surprises me that they haven't revisited it like they've revisited Eberron or like they've revisited Ravenloft, which is again another subject for another time. I just read an article that they are going to go back and do Ravenloft, but they're going to get rid of some of that classic Gothic horror and approach it a different way. But I digress. Oriental Adventures is something that has been around in D&D for a long time. So why they haven't dusted it off and produced a 5th ed version makes me concerned that they're not doing it because they don't want to upset somebody. That's my worry. I hope that's not the case, and I don't know if it is, but I would hate it if that were true.
Yeah, I'd hate that as well. They'd really be missing out. I mean, it's like half the world.
Well, yeah, but I mean, why should all of your D&D fantasy be, pretty much, well, it's Tolkien, isn't it? We'll deal with that in episode 1. But I mean, why is it all this Western fantasy have to be like this? Why can't it be samurais and shugenjas and wujen and all that kind of stuff? Like, and I just worry that there would be the cry of cultural appropriation may be a little too loud for them if they were to do that. Maybe it's not. Maybe they'll come out with something like that, down the line in a year or two's time. But maybe not. And I worry that you can't, as a game designer, release a game that is inspired by a culture that you are not part of?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of have you done it justice or not. I think would be the kind of default reply. What are you approaching this with respect, or are you approaching it to kind of pillage it for your own gain?
How subjective is that? I mean,
Yeah, exactly,
accusations can be leveled. If you as a game designer go in with a great attitude and a very kind of a good heart and to sit down and write a product, that doesn't stop somebody else turning around and saying, I'm offended by that.
True, and there's also the element of you then proceeding to make money off the product that has been inspired by a foreign culture, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, again, another sticky subject, but I hope we're not moving into a situation where, in order to portray a living or disappeared culture in a role-playing game, you have to have some sort of badge of authenticity to do that, to not kind of suffer at the hands of the kind of screaming minions, that are going to get upset by it. So, if I want to, for instance, and somebody on there, I'll put a link to this game on the Discord. There was a recent game that went through Kickstarter, which was kind of Native American inspired, which I think is fantastic. Two of my favorite early Shadowrun source books are the Native American nations, and I've watched a lot of documentaries on the Old West and the absolute horrors and travesties that those people have gone through, but that's another separate issue. But this role-playing game that is coming out almost wears the badge of authenticity that I previously mentioned with pride, that it is being created by First Nations designers and writers. Now, I don't have an issue with that. I applaud that. I think that's great. If you've got that, if that's your USP, then fine. But I'm wondering whether we're moving to a time in the industry where that is the only way you can do a Native American inspired. And even the term Native American, I understand how people can find that offensive. I'm just using it because it's common parlance. That doesn't necessarily make it true. I appreciate the plight of the First Nations people. Genocide is basically what we're getting into, but that's a discussion for another time. Am I, as a designer, excluded from creating a game that has those influences if I'm not part of that culture?
It's a great question. I'm trying to imagine now a foreign writer setting a game in modern England in the Midlands.
But no, it doesn't go that way though, does it? Unfortunately,
it doesn't.
The offence doesn't flow in that direction. The river, for deeper reasons that we all understand, it flows in the other direction. So, could I not possibly do a kind of African-inspired D&D campaign? And if I did, I would worry about how keen readers would be to learn more about me, to see if I have the authority to do that.
Yeah, no, you're right. This is something that I see a lot in existing products and stuff. So you're right to have to kind of approach it like that. It's definitely something that I've witnessed before in fiction and RPGs and film, I guess, to a certain extent, is that you've got to have the credentials to be able to pull it off. I think people are very sensitive about each other's cultures. Not necessarily a bad thing, I think we should be, but when it comes to creating, has that put a damper on the kind of inspiration that you might see otherwise? Has it slowed progress in terms of creativity when people are feeling like they can't bring to bear all of their creative toolkit on a project for fear that it might be taken the wrong way, and then they're kind of consigned to do something more safe, in quotation marks, that maybe wasn't their first choice, and then before you know it, you've got a kind of stifled creative community?
I think, unfortunately, there is a huge danger of that, and I understand people's concerns, and I appreciate that people can be offended by things, and that's understandable, and that's their right. But I do worry that it will create a certain environment in the RPG industry, particularly. I think I'm I'm not educated or experienced enough to take that conversation to a broader table. I'm just talking about RPGs because it's something I know about. And I worry that it will affect the kind of new RPGs that are coming out. Maybe it'll affect it in a good way. Maybe it'll push and allow the opportunity for non-English and non-English speaking game designers to bring their games which are inspired by the cultures which they are a part of to the wider audience, and maybe we'll all benefit because those voices will be given an opportunity to flourish, whereas previously all we did was had, middle-aged American white men writing, African games and Chinese games and Japanese games and all that kind of stuff. Maybe this will provide a better playing field. We'll have to see where that goes, and but I worry about the potential lack of diversity in the RPGs, mainstream RPGs, because of the fear of cultural appropriation.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps it's not mine and your place to really discuss diversity in any great detail without getting on diverse voices. I don't know about that. What I do know is it would be a shame to waste a lot of global culture for the sake of the kind of perspective of a very small westernized group with good intentions.
Yeah, I think unfortunately though, your intentions are no longer important. What's more important is, has somebody been offended by what you've done? The power lies with them, not with you. For right or wrong, I think that is where it is, I also wonder, to bring us back to the tournament situation, what if I sit down at a convention and I've written an African-inspired AD&D, Dungeons and Dragons adventure,
mm-hmm.
and I sit down to present it, and one of my players gets up and walks away, goes to the tournament organizer and goes, I find this deplorable. Like, how is this person? Why can you do this? How can you do this? And I'm like, oh, what have I done? Is that wrong?
Because in your head, approaching the game, you've been like, I found this cool mythological story. I really want to use it. I really love this people, and you're coming at it very innocently.
Rather than a necromancer, I'm going to have a kind of a well-researched witch doctor, do you know what I mean? And I'm going to look at the different types of magical practices that they used to do, and I'm going to try and wind that into the game, and the enemies are going to be like ghostly spirits of ancestors and stuff, and somebody goes, no, stop.
It's a tough one.
I mean, is that okay? Is that, I guess it's got to be okay? Because we don't get to decide what somebody's offended by.
I mean, we don't. I think the art of being offended is itself getting a bit out of hand. I saw John Cleese talking about this recently, but I mean, it's different when there is separate cultures involved. I think that's a different kind of subject than rather being offended about, like we were talking about earlier. If people don't like combat, for example, or people don't want something else. I think when you bring in representation of different parts of the world, when that's an element in the game, I think there's a different aspect to it, and I would certainly be sensitive in a different way than if I had players who just like to touch the X card a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, to create another example, I'm at a tournament and I'm running Shadowrun, okay? It's a game that I'm very familiar with. I've played a lot. Some people will know what it is. And I'm running a game of Shadowrun, and all of a sudden I present an NPC who is maybe like some sort of cyber pirate, and I'm a GM who likes to do voices. I like my NPCs to sound different. Especially at conventions when you're trying to create that atmosphere, that real dramatic, almost theatrical sense. And I do an accent. Is that bad taste?
Now that's an interesting one.
What if I do a Jamaican accent?
Yeah, I mean, for this one I'd lean more towards no, but only because you're portraying individuals rather than saying, I'm going to take this whole culture and use it for my own benefit and make money off it. You're saying this is a person who exists. This is what he or she sounds like
in a fantasy
in
world.
A made-up world.
This is a Jamaican orc we're talking
right,
about.
Yeah. Well, then you've got the whole problem about orcs being representative of that certain race of people, and then you're off on a whole other tangent, then, aren't you?
Yes.
But no, I don't know, man. I mean, it's like you say, it's not up for us to decide. The river doesn't flow towards us; the river flows away from us. But in terms of portraying NPCs, my argument there would be you're talking about specific individuals, and thus you'd have to go pretty far to draw some kind of warranted offence from people, as opposed to saying it's a character. It doesn't matter, it's the character same as any other character I've got here. He's got quirks, vices, motivations, things he hates, things he wants. If you've got a fully fleshed out person, I can't see there being any reason to be offended at whatever accent you may attempt, as long as it was done well. You're quite good at accents, to be fair, so I can't imagine that
Thanks.
You'd butcher it. Although I'm now expecting a Jamaican nun who's pregnant in my next game. So.
I'm coming together with a plot, I'm telling you. So get your X cards ready. But no, I am pushing to the extremes in order to kind of for us to get to the spear point of the conversation. But I do worry, and this is really in a competition, tournament, convention style situation. And I guess maybe the best thing to do is just do your own voice for all the NPCs, and that's the best way that nobody's going to be offended, because then everybody knows you, and there can be no argument about what you meant, because even if I know that I'm coming from a good place, the other person at the table who doesn't know me doesn't know that. And I guess what I have to do to protect them and to protect my own reputation is to just avoid doing any voice that isn't. I can do high and low voices and slow and fast, but I can't do an accent. Whether it's an Irish accent or a German accent or a Chinese accent or a Jamaican, whatever it is, it's best that I just don't.
Yeah, probably right. It's probably best that you don't do a lot of things with strangers that you may do very comfortably with friends.
Yeah, but then isn't that a bit weird that all of my NPCs have to talk in my voice?
Not if you like me, and that's how you do it anyway.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. No, you're right. I mean, if you're then changing your style to adapt to something that maybe you don't necessarily agree with or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're changing how the game is then changing, isn't it? And whether or not it's being sacrificed. If I lose the accents and voices of NPCs, and that takes away from the game, and the game is less because of it, then your view and your vision is suffering as a result of these kind of social contracts that we're bound into. And that's really where my concern is. I always think, as long as there's no problem, as long as the game isn't touched, absolutely fine. No problem with anything. People can do what they want. But if I'm running a game and my game starts suffering as a result of some of these things, I mean suffering in terms of maybe mine and the player's vision not going to plan, or what we expect from a role-playing game is not delivered on. If the game starts suffering as a result of whatever it might be, you can't do accents or whatever, then that's where my concern starts to arrive into the scene, because you want to have the full experience that you're going for, don't you?
Yeah, I would love if somebody listening has had an experience, either side of that experience, whether you've been offended by something at a table or whether you have inadvertently offended somebody at a gaming table. And, obviously, no names. But if somebody wants to share their experiences on the Instagram or come on the Discord and have a chat about it, I'd be really... I think I would benefit from hearing other people's experiences and perspectives.
Yes, definitely. I know I would, because I don't get offended by anything. I can be witness to the most horrible things and it doesn't faze me. So I would like to have that opposing view, If you have been at a gaming table and something has offended you, get in touch with us. We want to hear about it. humanenergyfieldpodcast@gmail.com. Join the Discord. Let us know on the Instagram. DM us on the Instagram as well. Let us know if something offends you that you don't want to see in games. Let us know. If you've seen this happen with someone else, let us know as well. What's going on over there where you are?
Yeah, because we can only talk from our limited experience. We can't be at every gaming table. We can't be at every convention. We can't be every person. We can only be ourselves. But I think we grow, don't we, by listening to other people's experiences. So I would love it if people would could reach out and tell us their stories.
Yeah, I would really like that. And we get a decent ones. We'll read them out on an episode as well. We'll read out the emails and stuff, and then we can have a chat about those. I think that would be really cool.
100%, let's do that, yeah.
I mean, we also have a bunch of audio from interviews and conversations that we've had that we've recorded that's still waiting to be put out, just by the way, listeners. So if you've joined in on an open call in the past and you haven't heard yourself yet, I do apologise for that. We've got a lot of audio backlog to get through, but in terms of what we've been discussing for the past episode, this is really something that we both want to touch on. We want those different voices. We want those diverse opinions. We want to be challenged on things that we've said. We want to find out new things. We want to kind of have that discovery with you, the listener. So get in touch with us. Let us know.
Yeah, I just want to, before we draw anything to a close as well, I want to just do a shout out to a couple of podcasts I've been listening to.
Okay.
I listened to the first episode of Dice Thrower podcast. Which you can check them out on Instagram. I really enjoyed episode. Did you listen to episode 1 yet?
I have now. Yes, I have.
I really enjoyed it. Warhammer Games Workshop, 40k heavy, kind of light discussion podcast. Very easy listen in a good way. One of those podcasts that's hits the note of I had it on when I was working and I felt like I was part of a little 40k discussion that was going on in the background.
Brilliant.
And I like that. And both the host and the guest on episode 1 were really interesting and well spoken. I really enjoyed listening to Dice Thrower. So if you are banging into your Warhammer and you want to get on board with a podcast at ground level, because I know sometimes podcasts can be quite there's a lot going on. There's a lot of episodes. It can be quite daunting to jump into something that's been going for a long time, and it can be hard to get into. And I think sometimes when you join a podcast at episode 1, you can experience that beginning with them, and you can feel a bit more of a part of it. So anyone who wants something new to listen to, kind of Warhammer and other gaming wider related, should check out Dice Thrower. I know episode 1 was Warhammer related, but I'm not entirely certain where he's taking it with the way he's going to do RPGs and other gaming related stuff. I think he is, but the first one was Warhammer centric.
I think it's I really liked it because it's not just two guys talking about what their favourite models are for however long. Will, who we now know, likes to talk about the person behind everything, so you might get a bit of chat about Blood Angels or whatever, and then he'll ask you why you like them, and then it goes into a bit of a personal discussion as well. So he rides that line quite well, I think. So it's not just heavy Warhammer talk. It's actually kind of it's actually interesting.
Yeah, that is. I think he was mentioning on the Discord, wasn't it? That's his approach. He wants to look at the people in the be whatever they're doing, whatever part of this industry they're in, or whatever side of the table they're on. Like, he wants to get to grips with the person, and I think that's a good approach. It's a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that. What else have you been listening to?
I got back into listening to Full Metal RPG, which is admittedly something that I used to slavishly, fanatically listen to it all the time. And anyone who kind of follows me on Instagram, whatever, will know that, I've kind of known the FMRPG guys for a long time. And I kind of, as you do, you kind of drop out of listening to stuff, not for any other reason than just you forget to miss an episode, and then you don't listen to another one, and then
time passes.
Yeah, time passes, and it kind of gets out of your schedule. And I was on a walk the other day, and I thought, do you know what? Rather than put music on, I'm gonna delve into some FMRPG. Brendan, great guy, came on our Discord and had a chat and stuff, and which was fantastic. So to anyone else who's an FMRPG listener and whatever, please do, come on over to our Discord and share your thoughts and opinions and stories and stuff. So I thought, I'm going to check out the most recent episode, and this was 113, and it was good. It felt like putting on a pair of comfortable Dr. Martens that you've worn in years ago, and you forgot how comfortable they were, and you pull them out of the cupboard and you dust them off and you put them on and you think, man, these are good boots. Why have I not been wearing these boots for ages? You know, that's what it felt like. So I slipped the FMRPG boots back on, and straight away I was back into that discussion, which was it's really well structured. Some great opinions on it, talking about different kind of games, OSR, narrative story games, the kind of real Forge style RPG chat that I kind of like. You know, it's real kind of getting to the bones of the RPG stuff, and I got a lot from that, and I thought it was really interesting. Didn't necessarily agree with everyone's opinions, but then that's what you listen to it for. You know, some I did, some I didn't. But yeah, so anybody who, for the few people maybe who are listening to us who don't listen to FMRPG, then, you know, I can definitely say go over, and that episode 113 was a great starting place for anybody who's just into the RPG tabletop hobby and wants to kind of listen to some structured and valued opinions. I think that was a really good one. I think this has probably got me back onto the FMRPG train. I think I'll be putting their podcast into my regular listen, I think, along with you know, Dice Thrower and stuff like that. So
I'm just waiting for Ben Bailey to return.
Well, they have a like a Warhammer spin-off, which I haven't listened to, and to be honest, I don't think I'm going to, because I just don't need any more Warhammer podcasting in my life. It's just not something I'm massively into. I used to be into 40k a lot more than I am now, and I enjoy it for what it is. And, you know, and I hate to use this term, but I'm more into my old hammer than I am for my kind of new tournament stuff or whatever. So I'm a bit out of the kind of modern 40k scene, and so a lot of it I don't click with. But I might get around to listening to it. But if, you know, sake of transparency, I haven't listened to that, so that might be good. I'm sure it probably will be, but I haven't personally listened to it. So
yeah, you're referring to a spin-off podcast called Realm of Fire, and that's Brendan and a gentleman called Rob, who I currently am running a campaign. Rob's one of my players, so can confirm both Brendan and Rob are really, really great guys. If nothing else, that's probably your in, worth a listen, just for the hosts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What about that Great Rift podcast? Have you listened to that yet?
I haven't. No, I'm going to be honest with you. I'll be really honest. I didn't know it existed until I read the interview in Eye of Terror. That's how much my eye is off the ball with Warhammer and 40k. I didn't even know it was a thing. I might listen to it because the interview was great and it sounded really good. And I think the good thing is they discuss certain books on certain episodes. So I think if the book appeals to me, I'll go and listen to them talking about it. But I would avoid the episodes with the books that I probably didn't fancy. And I think that's a way for me to kind of dip into that. I might do it that way, because I'm really not up to date and with kind of Black Library fiction at all. So it might be a way for me to learn about some of that without having to read, you know, hundreds of books.
That's cool. That's probably a good way to use it, I think. I really want to read that book by James Swallow, who wrote Flight of the Eisenstein. He did a new book about Sororitas. I forget what it's called, but it's got a battle sister on the front, and I really want to read that because I thought James Swallow was a really good writer. So cool. I'm going to go and search out Great Rift Podcast now and see if they've done an episode on that book. I think it's called Faith and Fire, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, good call, man. I'm going to go and find that out now. Have I listened to any podcasts recently? I mean, all the podcasts I listen to are either stand-up comedians or cryptocurrency, big data stuff. So I don't have much hobby input. Other than there's this little podcast, I'm sure you've heard of it, called Human Energy Field. It's pretty good. You should check it out.
Yeah, it's alright, innit?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, I listen to that.
Yeah. But yeah, otherwise, bring it back around to Warhammer. We have our ongoing Forges of Nothos project, which we are keeping up in the Discord. And to round off every episode, we like to just have a little update about our Warhammer. So it began, so it will end. What have you been up to recently?
Well, my 500-point army, the True Sons of Rus, is assembled. Yeah, it's fully assembled. The 500-point army, my head count is 16 models, which is obviously not very high, but it's perfect for getting back in, starting a small army. So it's been pleasing to see it now fully assembled. I haven't begun painting it yet, but I will soon, because as things are beginning to open up and travel is becoming possible, I really want to take the opportunity to have this force ready to, roll some bones on the table and push my guys around,
Got to push those little wolves around the table, definitely.
And say, "Ow!"
Oh, love it.
That will be the noise that I use when I push them, and it will become annoying after time. So I'll just do it when I move my assault troops. I won't do it for my grey hunters. I'm not a maniac.
Oh yeah, you're not. Yeah.
No, I'll just do woo for my assault guys who've got jump packs. So, which is very non-wolvy, by the way. So there's trad Space Wolf players who are screaming at me for using jump packs. I know, but
that's
I'm
why
going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So.
ever pushing boundaries.
Too punk, man. That's what I am. I'm too punk.
Too punk. I mean, what is punk really? That's something that we don't really want to get into right now, let's be honest. As well as building, we also like to write for this project, and I've got some fluff that has been posted up in our Discord channel for documents and that kind of thing. We also previously mentioned Will of Dice Thrower podcast fame has submitted a bit of fluff as well for the Liber Nothos archives. That was really cool because I was chatting with him about it. He just came up with an idea and ran with it, and then I'm there kind of cheerleading him, going, "Come on, write some fluff, man. I want to read what this is about." And then he comes back to me with a little PDF, and we have a talk about it, and it's being able to explore concepts and ideas that you might otherwise not be able to in 9th edition or in a more stricter setting is really what I love about what we're doing over on the Discord with our Warhammer project. Will's idea was a Adeptus Arbites who has been kind of abandoned and left as her squad has been wiped out by whatever cataclysm has befallen the planet, I think. I'm paraphrasing, but this lone Arbites finds herself kind of wandering the wastes, and he all of a sudden now, just off this idea that he's had, you've got this visual image of this kind of lone wanderer in like wrecked old Imperial armor with like her power maul or a baton or whatever she's got, just wandering the wastes, beating skulls in to survive and becoming a cannibal and stuff. I
like that.
Yeah, so that's really cool, and if I had the spare funds and the spare time, it would make me want to go out and try and eBay an Arbites model and then, bring that to life. So just reading someone else's fluff makes me want to go out and see if I can create that.
The great thing with Third Ed is if you kit bash that model, you could take her as maybe a sergeant, like a veteran sergeant, or you could take her as an Inquisitor. And just, even though that she's a rogue Arbite, like you can just stat her up as an Inquisitor and give her whatever kit you want. Those Third Ed, Witch Hunter, and Demon Hunter codexes are so rewarding to the creative player that you could easily just slot that into your army. Like, it's just amazing as a little under the HQ choice. That what I think is what I'm going to love about this Nothos project moving forward is coming up with these kind of fluff and narrative ideas, and then we go, do you know what? I'm going to make one of those and get that on the table. This character from this story, fuck it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make that guy, and I'm going to put him in a squad or just put him in whatever,
Yeah, I love that. It's so versatile, isn't it? The way the army builder, like I could just build armies forever. We have people in the Discord saying, "Oh, I wish I could afford the models," and and then we're saying, "Well, you don't need to buy anything. You just want to build the army list. That's fun in itself. It's just putting the army together."
Yeah, show us your cool army list for some mad cool Third Ed army list. Yeah, man.
Yeah. You never know, you might see it manifested physically one day. So that's really cool, yeah. And what I also love about these Third Ed codices, the Witch Hunters and Demon Hunters ones, they have in the back, I think I saw you talking about this with someone else, they have in the back like an alternate army list where you can make like an evil version of the units presented. So it'll talk about adversaries, you can make a group of mutants, and you can make like a apostate deacon who's turned away from the ecclesiarchy and this kind of thing, and it gives you the rules and the stats, and they can purchase 15 points from the Chaos Space Marines armory and all this kind of thing. So they really lay out how you would go about doing it and still give you the choice.
Yeah, and they give you some great ideas about why witch hunters or demon hunters would fight any army in the 40k universe.
Yes, love that.
And they give you some lovely little plot hooks to jump off on, and I think that is just so good. There's a feel and a freedom that you get from these 3rd edition codexes, which you do not get from the kind of modern, 9th edition codexes, or even the 8th edition ones. They're very different creations. They're very different books. Some people will prefer the different types, but I think for what we wanted was this really narrative-driven experience. I think 3rd Ed is so rewarding.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really my era of Warhammer, but I'm glad that we're kind of existing within this edition, because it really is. It really kind of enables the player to put together what they want.
No, yeah, and it does, and I think we're going to use 3rd Ed as the kind of base default, but we're not afraid to step into some some Inquisitor 28 or some kind of modified old school Necromunda, or we're going to do skirmish stuff with it as well. But I think using 3rd Ed as that kind of core set of mechanics and rules is just it's so many options. It's just the myriad.
Yeah, real myriad of options. So reading those adversary lists at the back has given me the idea for the next unit that I'm making for Nothos. So, for example, if you guys want to come to Warhammer World when on our Nothos tournament day that we're definitely going to be booking at some point, I'll have 2, maybe 3 armies, so that if you come without an army, I'll have something to give you so you can still play. I'll of course be playing my Chaos Sisters. I've decided to put together a group of mutants, like ash waste kind of scav mutants that roam
Nice.
through the catwalks and the industrial wastes of Nothos.
The mega factorums.
All of that stuff, all of the good stuff. I'm going to be using. I've got some Chaos Marauder bodies and legs on sprues, which are notoriously hard to get hold of after a quick eBay search. So I'm glad I got those. And a bunch of arms and legs and stuff from, I think they're Cadian Imperial Guard stuff. They've got shoulder pads on, so lots of flamethrowers and chainswords and stuff. And some old Mornheim heads. No, some old Frostgrave heads. My bad. I think they're from Frostgrave. And for the boss, I'm going to use some kind of Ogre Kingdoms ogre and make him all bionic.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, make him all like a cyborg ogre. So, and that's just from the fluff that we've made already and reading the adversaries list and going, you know what? There's that. I think it's that Adrian Smith artwork in the back of the Witch Hunters book. Where the guy's got he's holding the bolt gun to the prisoner's head. I love that artwork so much, man. So just looking at that, I was like,
so sick.
I've got to make a unit based off that piece of artwork. It's so good.
It's a great thing about doing 500-point armies and stuff as well, is it's so not daunting to go, do you know what, I'm just going to make another one. Just going to make a little one. It's two squads and a couple of HQs, and I'll root around and find the old stuff or kit bash something, and it's like all of a sudden, as you say, you've got a couple of armies. But yeah, we'll definitely be at Warhammer World when it is safe to do so. We'll be organising some stuff, won't we? Without a doubt, for those listeners who are in the UK and want to come along and hang out and maybe do a day or a weekend or something.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really looking forward to that. I've already got people messaging me on the Discord and elsewhere saying, you guys should do something at Warhammer World. People are hungry for it. So as soon as it opens up, we'll be back there. Definitely, we'll get them feature tables booked.
Yeah, we don't need an excuse to go to Warhammer World anyway, do we?
Yeah. So. That's some good times there, man. Some good times there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You'll see me in Bugman's bar. It's fine. It's where I'll be holding court.
Just to round off the Warhammer chat, I'm going to be updating you about this because I'm not sure how it's going to go. But I've ordered for storage and transport of my minis. I've got some plastic boxes and I've got some sheets of magnetic.
It's such the cool thing to do now, isn't it? To get those storage boxes and just put a sheet of magnets down on it. When did that become cool? I totally missed that, and now everyone does that now.
Mate, I'm the wrong person to ask about trends in Warhammer. I'm absolutely the wrong person to ask about that. I don't know. I saw it and I thought that actually makes sense, so that's what I'm going to try.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing worse than pushing some spindly model in between jagged bits of foam and just losing an arm, or, do you know what I mean? Like, the amount of times I've pulled pure string gene stealers out of a GW carry case and they're just bodies with no arms. It's crazy. So yeah, I can totally see the appeal. I just A, don't know how it took that long for us as a community to figure it out, and B, it's just spread like wildfire. It's like, you know, it's what the cool kids do to carry their troops now. So
right. Well, count me in that group then, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're right. I don't know why it took so long for people to figure out that this is probably the good way to do it, but I'm going to give it a shot. I've got to cut around 30 bases and then stick this self-adhesive magnetic paper onto the bottom of 30 odd bases of these sisters, and then hope that each of them sticks to the other side of the magnet that I'm going to put in the box. So there's a bit of fiddling to be done, but if that doesn't work, I'll get the little magnets, the little silver ones. So there's options.
I think, to be honest, though, without getting too much into it, you know, it's a subject for another time, but as models from GW have become more kind of mad and dynamic, and they just don't fit in the traditional carrying options, you know, like, I think the old school GW options, the foam cases, were really just designed for very simple, solid sculpts that you used to get through second edition and maybe even the third edition and stuff. And because of the increase in technology and skill and stuff and sculpting, models are just crazy now, and it's almost impossible to fit them into a box.
That's true.
Even just kind of standard models, so it kind of makes sense that we had to adapt, you know.
Yeah, but like you say, subject for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, adapt we shall, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other kind of fluff and armies come out of this ongoing project that we've got going on. There's some great stuff in the Discord, honestly. Some people are coming up with some really great models, all kinds of realms of chaos, beasts and demons and stuff like that. So it's really exciting to see this come together, and as the moment we can get minis down on a table and roll some dice, it'll really come to life, I think.
Yeah, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that won't be too long now, as we seem to be seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, don't we? So
we do. You're right. Light at the end of the tunnel, guys. You've made it this far. Thank you so much for listening to us talk about minefields of cultural appropriation and Wuxia. I really appreciate it. Just to reiterate what we've said, if you have any input, please head over to the Discord, head over to the Instagram, head over to the Gmail. Just send us your thoughts, send us what you think about the episode. If you are one of the lucky people who has listened now to all 10 episodes, you've earned a right to have a comment on the show. So send us something and we'll bring it up. If you've listened to all 10 at this point, then get in touch with us. We want to hear from you. What do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think we always said at the beginning when we started this that we really wanted to make this a two-way street as much as we could. So we really encourage people to share your thoughts, because we're not going to ignore them. It's giving us fuel for the episode. So, you know, if it's something that you want to just chat about text-based on the Discord, great. If it's a subject you're really passionate about and you think you've got a lot to say, then, you know, maybe be a guest. Come on, you know, come and we'll record, talk about it. If there's a subject you're really passionate about, or you're an expert in, or whatever it happens to be, great, you know, get in touch with us and maybe we can have that conversation, record it, and everybody can hear it. That would be sweet.
Yes, and we have some great guests lined up for future episodes as well. I've already got a lot of people in the waiting list. We haven't
had a guest on for a while, have we? So we need to get on that.
You're right. It's about time. I'll go dive into my phone book and summon up one of the guests waiting to come on, I think, and we'll get some new voices on the show. I think that's what we need for the next episode, maybe.
100%.
Thanks, man. Always a pleasure.
Of course.
Thanks for listening, guys. Really appreciate it. As always, stay safe, stay hydrated, and to leave you with a final thought, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is a old Chinese proverb which means to hide your strength from others. So I encourage you all to follow that advice and keep yourselves on track and don't care about what people think of you. Just be the Crouching Tiger, be the Hidden Dragon in the bamboo forest. Good night.
Night.